I took a poll asking my viewers if they would prefer the journal approach of episode 0 or if they would prefer a more detailed guide. The poll was largely inconclusive, so I'm pretty much just going to be doing both. So continuing on from episode 0, we can squeeze a couple more red circuits out of the plastic. So we're gonna use those for electric furnaces and quality modules. Quality modules is pretty easy. The electric furnaces will be tricky since it needs stone brick and steel, which are all over my starter base. We're on a bit of a time limit. We've run out of stone and we're quickly running out of other resources for our starter base, so we will need to expand mining operations as soon as possible. After determining the Roboport grid I'll be using for this run, which is slightly larger than the Roboport grid I used in my last run, it is time to get into the meat and potatoes of Novice. I have some iron ore to the north and copper to the east and the west of where the smelting stacks will start, and I'll be filling them full of quality modules before turning them on. Can't have a quality focused playthrough if we're not focusing on quality as often as we can, which is pretty much includes everything that isn't directly inserted or coming out of the starter base. I'll be doing a lot of handcrafting until we get more of the intermediate items onto the bus, so it's a good idea to start collecting some of the extras that you have since it's the most time consuming part of the handcrafting process. The machines themselves don't actually take that long to make. I'm slowly adding in the Roboport grid so I can connect the power to all the miners. I won't be adding bots to the network until I can greatly increase my power. Okay, so it's time to start figuring out exactly what I want on the bus, so I'm going to use constant combinators to keep it organized. I tried to keep this to a single Roboport grid, and obviously we'll have iron and copper lanes, so I'll have 4 of each. I also considered separating the 2 lines of green circuits, but I like to condense my lines, so we'll be keeping them together. I also want steel, and I've been using gears on my bus lately and absolutely love it. LES will be here as well, and pipes. I'm adding pipes because we'll be using it often enough, and I'd prefer to have as little made on site as possible since we'll need them to have quality as well. I normally prefer 6 lanes of pipes with water, oil, petroleum gas, light oil, lubricant, and sulfuric acid. And ultimately I decided to have them invade the space between the belts since we're largely using underground pipes anyways, and we'll have the option to bypass any underground belts that need the space. This gives us extra room for more items. We'll need quality coal coming in as well, and this will be 100% dedicated to making 2 lanes of plastic. We'll save the 4th slot for rocket fuel, but I might change this later since we can probably get away with making rocket fuel near any rocket silos. The last items we'll have on the bus are stone brick, concrete, electric motors, and batteries. I might hold off on the batteries and use engines instead, but we'll see. Now that we know what we want, it's time to start making larger modular stacks for quality smelting. Since we have copper right next door, we'll have our first smelters making copper plates. This will bring in 2 belts and smelt 2 belts worth of material. I know it might seem like an odd way of smelting, but making a modular build like this really comes in handy when you plan on extending them, as you can just copy and paste a section when you upgrade to faster belts. I normally don't place all the furnaces I'll be using at once, but when the bots started going at it, I figured, why not? I ended up cutting off the lower sections since crafting the nearly 2,000 quality modules that we'll need to fill the miners and furnaces has been extremely slow. Now it's time to hook up the first iron. I haven't been showing it, but there's been a lot of back and forth collecting quality modules. Okay, it's time to set up some miners that will be bringing in ore for our steel. I like to keep them separated from the miners for the iron plates when I can. And yes, they're getting quality modules too. I decided I needed more iron ore for my starter base sooner rather than later, so I'm filtering only normal quality off the lines for the furnaces. I also decided to go ahead and set up the second set of copper miners. Nailed it. To avoid direct insertion, I decided to keep the furnaces for iron plates separate from the furnaces for steel. It's around this time that the problems with focusing on quality start to pop up, as the inserters will grab whatever quality iron plate is currently on the belt when it's ready to start feeding the furnace. So we'll try to control this a little bit by filtering the inserters for quality to contain the problem. We'll also try to prevent the belts from being stalled by quality, so we'll be merging the iron plates back onto the bus. I decided that pulling normal quality from the quality lines was too slow and decided to tap the other iron patch to bring in more iron for our starter base. Okay, it's time to make some gears. I'm not really sure why I decided to have the plates come into the middle of the build, as it would have been better to have it on the outside, but I'll be changing this later. The way we'll solve the quality problem here is to have inserters dedicated to each quality, and then the iron plates will wrap back around onto the bus. And this will be our strategy going forward. It's always better to have too much than not enough. Now that we've set up the start of the gears build, it's time to get the output onto the bus. Next up is green circuits. We all know what the green circuit build looks like, or at least a few of the variations. Because of quality, we'll be doing things a little different. So I'll be setting this up using a 1-to-1 copper cable to green circuit and won't be putting quality into the copper cables. It would be a complete nightmare to deal with randomly upping the quality of the copper cables, which would require either a place on the bus or to have a belt that loops back around into itself to prevent clogs. I thought I would be able to add a second green circuit build next to this one, but decided both not to add one next to it and not to double up. We will be back to correct this later. After getting the iron and copper plates back onto the bus, it is time to set up oil processing. Thankfully, we have blue science on our starter base, so advanced oil processing is already unlocked. We'll start with 5 refineries for now, and I'll be adding 10 more shortly. I'm mostly just replicating what I've done in the past, and if we need more processing, we can always add more. Leaving room for beacons, we'll be placing our chemical plants next door for processing our oil into other oil products. Heavy oil will go into lubricant and light oil will go into petroleum gas. Having a setup like this makes adding in the pipes extremely easy, as well as setting up the next part, since we can just copy and paste it and then change the recipe. If we need to add anything to this later, it'll be doubling up on the light oil cracking. I decided the pipes running between the oil refineries and the chemical plants were a little too cramped and that we needed to move it over a bit. Better to do this now since we don't have any oil coming in, so we're not losing anything but time. It was around this time I decided my gears were wrong and that I needed 2 belts of green circuits coming out of the RoboPort grid rather than just one, so I changed the way all the belts were coming in off the bus and reversed the inputs and output lines for the gears. Getting 2 extra lines into the green circuit build and 3 extra coming out was rough, but doable. Then it was time to double up on what I had. I'm sure we'll be adding more to this build soon, but at least by that point we can simply copy and paste. In our third wave of Deja Vu, I'm adding in those extra 10 oil refineries I mentioned earlier and filling out the rest of the chemical plants. Now we just need to bring in some oil and water. I'll be starting with the water since it's the closest. And I'm pretty sure I'll need to move all these pipes later, but it'll work for now. For oil, we're just going to take off the oil that we already have going into the starter base. We'll need to expand oil operations later, but the one oil field will do for now. After dragging the oil up to the bus and actually giving the pump some power, oil is now fully operational. Can't forget fluid storage. I'd say that's a pretty important part. Which reminds me, I should probably put green circuits back onto the bus. I know it seems odd referring to putting items back onto the bus when I'm actually just making them, but similar to how we're bringing in the items and having them wrap back around onto the bus itself will eventually wrap back around onto itself so that any of the quality items that were missed or haven't had the chance can have more chances at being used again. We don't want the bus to stall for any more than a few seconds in the rare chance that the wrong quality blocks inserters looking for a different quality. But just in case, we'll probably plan on having a way of limiting how much can be merged together at a time and eventually dealing with the excess in other ways. I don't have footage of it happening, but I ended up tapping a coal patch to the south and dragging a single belt all the way up here to be used for plastic. Speaking of plastic, that's next on the agenda. For plastic, we'll need coal and petroleum gas, and since liquids can't be quality, we really only have quality coal to deal with to make quality plastic. Since this is more permanent, we'll be preparing for everything up to legendary. I only have enough production for a single lane, but this will be doubled shortly. Next up is red circuits. I could have set it up in a way that's similar to green circuits, where I have a single copper cable supplying a single red circuit, but this is just temporary anyways until we get to the EM plant from Fulgora, so let's just call it a decent test. Having quality red circuits is a bit tricky since the normal ratio is 1 copper cable to 6 red circuits, but since we're not producing that many blue quality items, it'll be very rare that all of these assemblers are crafting at the same time. Since I'm dealing with only quality items on the bottom portion of this build, I certainly should have filtered the splitters for quality. I'll come back and correct this later. Getting materials out of a build and back onto a bus is probably one of the most frustrating parts of this run so far, and I expect it to continue to give us problems in future builds, especially when we start making items for a shopping mall, which is going to need a ton of space. Future problems for future auto. Even just getting the items to each machine will be more complicated since I'm not merging belts together. I may have to consider merging belts later, then filtering them back out when we get them back onto the bus. I was initially planning on having 2 grids for red circuits, but since we're bringing in full belts rather than merging them, this gives me the option to have one really massive red circuit build rather than 2 builds. Okay, that is going to be the end of this episode. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to like the video. I put a lot of time and effort into this, so it would be greatly appreciated. Alright, I will see you in the next one, and thanks for watching.